Well, now I want to introduce Jeff Jordan. Jeff is doing me a favor because he's building in styrene, which is a substance that I have never been able to master. So I really appreciate, Jeff, you doing this and showing all of us how easy it is from your standpoint to build in this, something that I hope I can learn.
And thank you, Jim. And tonight we're really getting into the heart of it. And I'll show you how you take packages of evergreen styrene and turn them into your model parts. So I'm going to try sharing screen here. See if I get my, so starting off with making the walls. And this is literally from that package of evergreen styrene siding material, the lapstrake type siding. And as I mentioned last week, it makes sense to wash this before you even start to work with it. It's slick. It comes with some sort of a mold release on it. And so either before you start cutting up the sheets, or certainly by the time you've cut it into individual pieces, make sure that you wash all of this in some warm soapy water to clean that stuff off of the surface. It will otherwise interfere with your ability to paint afterwards. So then to get into making the parts, as you can see here, I've just a handful of tools, a scale rule, not on this screen, but also I use a little square, which is very helpful for making sure that things are perpendicular. A pen, in this case with some bright colored ink, and a fresh new X-Acto blade. Don't use your old blade, get a new one out when you start cutting. And you definitely measure twice and cut once. You saw last night my drawings on with the dimensions, and so you're transferring those dimensions to the styrene sheets to cut out the individual parts. And so it's critical that you measure very carefully. As you can see in the center photograph there, you can see where my little tick marks were on the side, and use the square to make sure that that was square across horizontally. And I had that dimension from the horizontal line to the roof peak from counting the boards, but laid it out very carefully to make sure that it was dead center so that those little triangles are absolutely identical. And having laid that out, then you can start to cut. And as you can see in the left-hand photograph there, I'm just using a steel ruler. One trick I find is useful, you can see on the just above my fingers there's a little bit of masking tape, like that on the other side, just to help prevent it from sliding around. When you put a little pressure on the ruler, it doesn't slide. And as you can see, I very carefully lined up the ruler with that ink line, literally trying to split the ink line in half, and then using the X-Acto blade, draw it down the whole length of the line there, from the edge of the sheet of plastic to the other edge, just very gently. Don't try to bear down. In this case, the first cut is not the deepest cut. The first cut is a gentle and shallow cut, just enough to make sure that you're scribing the sheet of plastic with the line, the desired line, and then you can go back and hit it again a second time or a third time, each time just taking a gentle pass with a fresh, sharp new blade, and this stuff will scribe very easily, very cleanly. And then styrene plastic has a property that just about no other building material we use has, which is once you've scribed it several times and got a sharp scribe in it, you can pick it up and bend it at the scribe and it'll snap very cleanly, surprisingly cleanly, giving you a very smooth edge. Or depending on what you're working on and where you're working, sometimes you can't bend the piece. You can continue scribing till it goes clean through. But this one is just a couple of cuts. I think I may have cut the sheet in half, which I didn't show you here, to give me the first sheet so that I then could scribe the gables on it. And then in the right-hand photograph, there's the first two pieces, both made the same way. But the trick is once you've cut those, put them back to back and make sure that they're absolutely identical. The precision on the size of these walls right now will control how your model comes out. And if they're off, if one's a little wider or the gable's a little different, you're going to have problems. And so this is the time to match the sides, both ends, and make sure that they are absolutely identical. If you need to do a little sanding or whatever to make them identical, do so. And back in the old days when this styrene was cheap, if I was unhappy with a part, I would chuck it and make it again. Unfortunately, that's back when these sheets cost like $1 or $2. Today, they've gotten a bit more expensive. So cut carefully, and hopefully you don't have any throwaways. But it's really important to match up your side for side and make sure that they're absolutely identical. And then the rest of the walls, this structure has about 7 wall pieces. They're all cut in the same manner, starting with the clean sheet, working on the back, because it's really easy to mark that. As you can see, the pen ink, it takes the pen ink nicely, though it does not sink in deeply. So if you start scrubbing it with your fingers, it'll smear. But it gives you the ability to mark your work. I use the pink or red ink because it shows up so well. And if you make a mistake while you're just drawing and you're not happy with how that looks, a little alcohol on a cotton ball or a little wad of paper towel, and you can rub that ink off and start over again. So make sure that your markings are good, square, what you want your finished piece to look like, and then do your gentle cutting. So once you've cut all your pieces, now you need to lay out the locations of the windows and doors. As you can see in the upper left there, I've taken the drawing and moved that window dimension onto the wall piece, bearing in mind here, and that I believe as I made these drawings, I used the window castings I was going to use, that if your window dimensions are the prototype and the castings are not identical, you're going to have to compensate for that. And so, as you can see, I've got my little window casting there, the one that's going to go in the opening, so I can make sure that the rectangle there for the window matches the interior ridge of, in this case, a Grant line casting. And so carefully marking it off, again, you can see there's the square I use, very helpful to make sure everything remains perpendicular, and scribing that window so that it is square to the sides. Incidentally, this sheet stock comes out of the package fairly square, but check it before you start turning it into parts. Occasionally I have found a rough edge or an edge out of the package that is not perfectly square. And obviously you want to adjust that before you start making parts out of it. It's easy to sand, it's easy to cut. You can clean up a rough edge and make it a nice sharp edge with very little work, a little bit of sandpaper, sanding block, and give yourself nice sharp edges and nice square edges to work with. So then in the center, this is my technique for putting windows and door openings into these materials. After you have laid out in ink the location of the window, I take a small drill bit and drill each corner. And the purpose of that is to, you can then connect the dots with your steel ruler going on the outside edge, the tangent of the circle, and cutting or drawing the lines from circle to circle. And that prevents you from overcutting into the material you don't want to cut, gives you a nice stop and work your way around. Again, you're not going to be able to bend this piece to snap out the cut work. So you're going to have to scribe through at least 3 of the sides, and then maybe the 4th one will snap. But it's basically, again, carefully scribing, drawing that knife blade down numerous times over that spot until the opening comes out. And then this is designed, and the location of the holes that I've drilled are intentionally just a little bit in from the lines, so that the opening that you get, here you go in the upper left-hand corner, using the square, cutting from the edges of the circle, going all the way around, the opening that you get when you're done will be just a little bit small. And I find it very easy then, using the window casting, to enlarge that opening just slowly and gently. It pare off a little bit of the plastic with a knife, or with a emery type filing stick, to just open up the, measuring, testing frequently until it just drops right in. Oops, and that's the next thing I'm going to show you, but let's finish up with, we're going the wrong way here. Until it drops in again. Oops, all over the place here. There it is. Because one of the things you need to be sensitive to is, with this siding, if that window's crooked, it's going to show up because you've got all those horizontal lines. And so you want to make sure your window is nice and square. Indeed, it gives you a little guidance on the top and the bottom when you test it to make sure that it's absolutely square. And of course, one of the beauties of the Grant Line casting is they have a generous bit of trim around the edge. And so if you're out by just a little bit, well, Mr. Grant has thought of that, and it will cover little inaccuracies. Also notice this window is not centered on the wall. And so when you flip the piece over, keep that in mind, that you are working in reverse, so that you don't cut the window in off the wrong way. So more on windows here. Now, this is the back of the building, though this upper window is identical on both of them. And after searching and searching, I found nobody makes a window that looks like that upper window. But rummaging through my supply of Grant Line and other window castings, I found this window, which was, as you can see, was intended to be set up vertically, and it's got a little sill there on the right-hand edge. But the Grant Line plastic is actually quite soft, and as shown in the center picture, with just a little care, you can carve off the sill and clip off the ends of the sill, so that when you put it together, it looks like the example on the right. And that was just carving off that little bit of sill, maybe just a touch with a sanding stick, and you've turned that vertical window into a horizontal window, and a pretty nice approximation of the prototype window, rather than scratch building the window, which would be your other alternative. And you'll see later on when I had to resort to making my own doors. But this casting was close enough, and it was quite easy to modify to give you that window. Here's the doors. The front of the building's got a lot going on. The three windows are identical, but they're different doors. And the front door is somewhat masked by the screen door in front. And I will make that screen door, and you'll see a little bit how I made that screen door. But on the left there is the Grant Line casting I had, which again was pretty close to the original, except it had the transom window on it, which I trimmed off. And looking closely at the window, especially on the right, you can see the diagonal boards that were used on that. There were no windows. The space was filled with diagonal boards. So I had in my supply of evergreen styrene, actually some old HO stuff, a sheet of horizontally scribed plastic evergreen, which by turning it at a 45-degree angle, as you can see there, I could get a diagonal, just cut out two rectangles like that and glued them into the doors. Gives me a pretty close approximation of the doors. I didn't bother to cut out the squares on the bottom because it's going to be behind the screen door and very hard to see. but I filled in those holes, put it together. And so you can see the glued together, and then that's actually been primed as well of the door that's going to go in the front door of the model. The other thing to notice on this is, unlike the Grant Line windows, this does not have a generous trim around it. And so you have to be very precise and very careful with cutting this opening so that this door assembly just fits, drops in with, there's nothing to cover up any inaccuracies here. I suppose you could always add some trim, even though the prototype, as you can see, does not have any trim. That would be a fallback, is if it's off a little bit, rather than cutting a whole new front, would be a little bit of trim. But I worked carefully and I got it to fit right. So here, there's all my walls. As you can see, the various walls for the main building, and then the lean-to on the side, all cut out using that technique. All the windows cut out, the windows and doors test fit. Nothing is glued in yet. And there was one change after I completed these. I economized on plastic by cutting out. You could have left this, or I could have left this as a solid wall, but instead I cut that out and used that for the side wall of the lean-to addition, and the dimensions work out just right. However, when I took this picture, I had not yet adjusted for the fact that the lean-to roof slopes down, and therefore this side had to be cut down a bit more, but it's not a difficult change. And so here we go on doors. The middle photo here, and if we go back, in the upper left-hand corner there, you can see the wooden door in the addition to the building. Obviously, nobody makes a casting that looks like that, but pretty easy to make your own. I took a thin sheet of green, just plain sheet styrene, lightly scribed it with a razor saw to give it some real texture, because as you can see in the photographs, this is the only wood in the building that you can see really deep grain showing. And so I grained that to get some contrast. And then again, working with my steel rule and making some tick marks, I marked off and just scribed those boards myself. And also it's a Dutch door. And so I gave it an even deeper scribe, but not cutting through. And then later on, it'll get some additional detail like a doorknob. But there's the door. And thinking ahead here, I intentionally made it oversized. Not only is it wider than the opening and taller than the opening, and the dimensions accounted for that. As you can see in the next photo, I also used this as a gusset to put the two pieces together. You could glue the door panel into the annex, leaving a little tab, and that gave me a really solid way to combine these two pieces into a single piece. And as I said, for a lot of this work, I am using just straight Testor's tube cement, which I really like for this because it doesn't set immediately. It comes out in a gel consistency, so it doesn't run. So it's very controllable, and it gives you a little time to make adjustments before it sets up. And in the worst case, it'll even come back apart. Whereas the super glue, taking it back apart can be very difficult. Also, if you use liquid plastic cement with a brush, that sets pretty much instantly as well. And the Testor's cement, therefore, gives you a little working time. And this is styrene. It's exactly what the Testor's cement was made for. It welds it together very nicely. Now, so you've got all these pieces and we're going to put them together. I had picked out a package of very stout, in this case, rectangular stuff.
Jeff, I'm afraid we lost you. Jeff? Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to come back next week and hear how Jeff put it all together.